South Africa is falling. The latest net foreign purchases of South African equities and bonds reveal huge capital outflows from local equity and bond markets. The data was published by DFM Global, an independent discretionary fund manager focusing on analytical analysis to help them build investment products. DFM Global's data on cumulative net foreign purchases and sales of JSE equities and South African bonds revealed an acceleration in South African equities and bond sales. The capital outflow from foreign investors started in the third week of this year, 2023, and accelerated in February and March. Over 170 billion rands, which is just over $9 billion in South African shares and bonds, have been sold by international investors since the start of 2023. The likely reasons for the selling of shares or stocks of South African assets include increased load shedding, South Africa's grey listing, and political uncertainty. First, let's define load shedding. In South Africa, when the electricity demand exceeds the available supply, planned supply interruptions may have to be carried out, which means periodic hours of blackouts throughout the day. This has been a growing issue since the early 2000s, with blackouts maybe happening once every other month for an hour or two. But this situation started to escalate between 2010 to 2018 when blackouts would happen every day. Now in the post-2020, blackouts happen every other hour. This makes this type of environment not only a huge inconvenience for the people living in South Africa, but also affects the daily operations of businesses. This has caused a lot of people, including foreign investors, to raise an eyebrow when it comes to the future of the country. Many are jumping ship and looking for investments in other parts of Africa and the world. JC Liu, the CEO of DFM Global, said the transactions recorded between January and March 2023 show the capital outflow is no longer a mere trickle. He added that the data showed foreigners are saying enough. And this was before they could factor in recent news that Eskom, South Africa's electricity provider, is exempt from reporting irregular expenditure. Liu said in March that there had been a massive net sale of domestic assets, which is very concerning. He continued by saying, "The net sales are a sign that foreign investors are voting with their feet. The power outages, the lack of reforms, the infrastructure problems, all these things put a lot of pressure on the country. The trend also means newer foreign investors that need to make asset allocations are taking their money elsewhere. They likely select more stable markets with a higher likelihood of some level of positive returns, especially with uncertainty dominating the world economy." Liu adds, "Apple and Amazon are not affected by load shedding, and if the GDP does not grow, companies in South Africa will not grow either." South Africa's mining sector is also losing the battle for international funds, with investors choosing to go elsewhere rather than face strict regulations and other investment challenges, and mining companies potentially following, analysts said. Sibanye Gold Limited and Anglo Gold Ashanti Limited, two large Johannesburg-listed mining companies with the bulk of their investors outside South Africa, have indicated they are considering moving their primary listings. Sibanye CEO Neil Froneman said during the company's first-half earnings call on August 29 that the company remained committed to working with the South African government and regulators to improve the business environment, but must consider where it was listed as it aims to become a true international company. Peter Major, a mining analyst with Mergence Corporate Solutions, said in an interview that South Africa cannot grow without foreign capital. For the last 25 years, the South African government has encouraged legislation and taken a position which is not investment-friendly, and investors have reacted accordingly. Investors now have hundreds of destinations from which they can choose, and mineral deposits are not the only consideration, Major said, adding that it has never been more important for mines to be able to work with governments, communities, labor, and environmental groups. Sasfin Securities analyst David Shapiro said in an interview, "There is no growth in South Africa, and there are far too many rules to government investment and investment policy. On top of that, the shareholders are not here, and local institution investment is quiet." Anglo Gold, with a long-established mining history in the country, is looking to sell its last remaining South African asset to refocus on its profitable operations in Australia, South America, and other African countries. "Mining is hard enough as it is without investors worrying if the goalposts might change. They will simply go to more investor-friendly locations," Shapiro said. Another aspect adding to South Africa's downfall is some of its citizen behavior and terror toward foreign nationals, especially those that are from neighboring African countries. During 2020, South Africa continued to experience incidents of xenophobic violence and discrimination against non-nationals, despite the government's launch of the National Action Plan to combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, NAP, in 2019. Law enforcement officials often responded with indifference or provided inadequate remedies to xenophobic attacks. Refugees and asylum seekers faced barriers to protection. This included a newly enacted law restricting access to asylum and a huge government backlog in processing claims and appeals. The government's COVID-19 aid programs, including food parcels during the national lockdown, overlooked people with disabilities, refugees and asylum seekers, and many lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT people. President Cyril Ramaphosa appointed 2 special envoys to help resolve the political crisis in Zimbabwe, and South Africa joined 66 other states in reaffirming support for the International Criminal Court. South Africa continued to be plagued by widespread incidents of xenophobic harassment and attacks against foreigners by mobs during 2020. The attacks and harassment were also committed by government and law enforcement officials. Non-nationals have also been harassed verbally and physically by South Africans for being foreign and not using local languages in their daily interactions. A common and hurtful insult thrown at foreigners is the label "Kwere Kwere," a derogatory slang used by Black South Africans to mean foreigner. Government and law enforcement officials throughout the country not only largely failed to ensure justice for xenophobic violence, but also operated in discriminatory and abusive ways against non-nationals. Some officials exacerbated xenophobia through insightful rhetoric, while the South African Police Service, SAPS, and Metro Police used counterfeit goods raids as a cover to target foreign-owned shops and businesses. During the raids, police officers beat foreign shop owners and fired tear gas and rubber bullets at them, ransacking and destroying their shops. Victims in the Johannesburg Central Business District and Diepsloot alleged that the police then resold confiscated goods back to them. The farm killings, horrific killings of farmers where victims were sexually assaulted, tortured, and strung up on poles, have sparked outrage in South Africa. In one of the cases, a female farm manager was sexually assaulted and strangled by 2 gunmen at her farm. In a separate brutal attack on a farm manager 290 km away, a man was tied to a pole and tortured before being repeatedly stabbed and then strangled. And in a third incident, a gang of 9 attackers allegedly threatened to rape a farmer's young children if he didn't cooperate and give them what they wanted. Farm manager Chantel Kershaw, 44, was ambushed by 2 armed men as she helped load a lawnmower onto a truck, The Sun reports. They then held her down and strangled her in the garage of her farm at Delmas, east of Johannesburg, and left her lying on the ground before pistol whipping her mother. Distraught mom Greta Spears, 65, was restrained as the farm was looted and a maid locked in a bathroom before they fled the scene in the family's white Chevrolet station wagon. Local neighborhood watch farmers forced the stolen vehicle off the road in a high-speed chase after being alerted by the murdered woman's mom and captured the suspects. A lot of issues that stem in South Africa are not favorable for foreign nationals and even for South African themselves. Corruption. Corruption in South Africa includes the improper use of public resources for private ends, including bribery and improper favoritism. Corruption was at its highest during the period of state capture under the presidency of Jacob Zuma, and has remained widespread, negatively affecting criminal justice, service provision, economic opportunity, social cohesion, and political integrity in South Africa. South Africa has a robust anti-corruption framework, but laws are inadequately enforced, and accountability in public sectors such as healthcare remains below par. In addition, internal sanctions have been employed to discourage whistleblowers from reporting corrupt activities in both the public and private sectors. According to a 2021 Afrobarometer survey, 76.2% of South Africans believe that ordinary people risk retaliation and other negative consequences if they report incidents of corruption. A scandal involving the Gupta family and former South African President Jacob Zuma pushed Zuma out of office as a long list of corruption complaints against the former president resurfaced. Complaints against Zuma range from the former leader's lavish spending of state funds to delegating contracts based on nepotism and businesses with familial connections or close ties benefiting through their association with him. The Zondo Commission was later created to investigate Zuma and his associates for corruption. On November 11, 2020, it was revealed that a historic anti-corruption blitz resulted in the arrest of more than 100 South African political, education, health, police, and business officials on corruption charges. The situation in South Africa has gotten so bad that South Africans are attacking their brothers and sisters by robbing and destroying South African-owned businesses. The citizens, those that seem to be from a less educated and poor economic level, are now unleashing their frustrations, attacking foreigners and farmers and committing crimes affected most economic levels. Some of those that commit these crimes go as far as to blame their struggles and the state of the country on foreign nationals from parts of Africa living in South Africa. But at the same time, instead of thinking of ways to build their economy through entrepreneurship and job construction, they choose violence. There are videos of individuals looting malls, foreign-owned businesses losing their livelihood, South African companies being burnt down, and all sorts of destruction of property. Not to mention the high level of crimes like housebreaking, robberies, hijacking, corruption, and fraud. With all that is at play, South Africans still fail to understand the actual cause of their situation, that being corruption and crime. They fail to see that the aid of foreign investments and influence is what has been keeping the country running for decades. They fail to understand that entrepreneurship and healthy competition are what push an economy. They fail to understand that the total reliance on government and grants has had an impact on their self-worth and ideals of independence. The value of education has also been put aside. They changed the graduation mark, pass threshold, by lowering it from 60% to just 30%. This has brought the country's overall education level lower than 2 decades ago. This has caused many foreigners to pick up their investments and leave the country. Ironically, many South Africans also see the cracks in the country and have decided to chase their future in another country as immigrants. With the continual rise in corruption, civil unrest, an unemployment rate of just over 31%, and a low economic prospect, South Africa's future looks bleak. Do you think that there is a way to turn the tides on South Africa's financial future? Or is South Africa going to be left in the past as a dead state? What is your perspective?